Story 1. The Passenger Seat. The night stretched endlessly across the empty highways of Wyoming. Above, the stars were so clear they almost looked fake, like a glass ceiling full of pinpricks. Below, the world was all dark asphalt, ghost towns, and cold winds that rattled loose road signs. Nathan Pierce tightened his grip on the steering wheel. His 18-wheeler, a battered old Freightliner, rumbled along Route 287, hauling a load of empty crates back to Denver. The road was deserted. Not even a flicker of another vehicle's headlights ahead or behind him. He didn't mind the loneliness. Most truckers didn't. It was part of the job. But tonight felt different. There was a heavy feeling in the cab, a sort of pressure, like the air had thickened. Nathan rolled down his window a crack, hoping the cold night air would shake off the unease crawling up his spine. It didn't help. He reached over to the passenger seat to grab his coffee thermos, and froze. The seatbelt on the passenger side was buckled tight. Nathan frowned, glancing over more carefully. No one was there. Just the worn fabric of the seat, the old stains of spilled sodas and grease, and that damn seatbelt, pulled across the empty seat, latched snugly into place. He could have sworn it was unbuckled when he left the truck stop 2 hours ago. He told himself it was nothing. Maybe he did it out of habit. Maybe it was loose before, and snapped into place when he hit a bump. Trucks vibrated a lot. Things shifted all the time. Still, Nathan reached over, unlatched the belt, and let it fall with a metallic clink against the seat. He shook his head and went back to driving, turning up the radio. Some old country song warbled through the speakers, not quite enough to drown out the nagging thought in the back of his mind. Half an hour later, he glanced over again. The seatbelt was buckled again. Nathan hit the brakes hard enough that the tires screeched against the pavement, his heart hammering in his chest. He stared at the seat, unblinking, trying to make sense of what he was seeing. The belt was pulled tight across the empty seat, the click of the latch locked in, clean and sure, as if someone invisible was sitting there, riding with him. The road stretched silent and endless ahead, but inside the cab, it felt like the night itself had slipped inside. It was cold. Too cold. Nathan's hands trembled slightly as he picked up the CB radio. "Anyone out there?" he said, trying to keep his voice steady. Static crackled back at him. Nothing else. "Just me losing my damn mind," he muttered, shifting the truck back into gear. As he pressed the gas, the truck lurched forward, but in the corner of his eye, just for a second, Nathan thought he saw movement. A small, slow shifting, like someone adjusting in the passenger seat. He didn't dare look. Not yet. Nathan kept his eyes locked on the road. His fingers gripped the wheel so tight, the knuckles turned white. He didn't look to his right. He refused. Mile after mile of empty highway unrolled in front of him, black as spilled ink, the yellow lines blinking past like slow heartbeats. The hum of the engine was the only sound, until the seatbelt clicked again. A soft, deliberate click. Nathan flinched. His heart hammered against his ribs. No, he wasn't going to turn his head. He wasn't going to see it. Whatever it was. Instead, he focused on the dashboard lights, watching the speedometer, the fuel gauge, anything but the passenger seat. He could feel it now, though, a presence. A weight in the cab that hadn't been there before. He turned the radio off. The silence was worse. Something shifted beside him. A tiny sound, like cloth rubbing against cloth. Nathan bit the inside of his cheek so hard he tasted blood. "Keep driving. Don't look." His mind raced. Maybe it was exhaustion. He hadn't slept properly in 2 days. Maybe he was dreaming with his eyes open. Hallucinations. They happened to truckers. Everyone said so. Right? He passed an old, rusted gas station on the side of the road. Its lights were off. For a second, Nathan thought about pulling in, parking the truck, and just walking away. Leave the Freightliner behind. Leave the crates. Run. But before he could even touch the brake, a voice whispered in his ear, "Keep going!" Nathan nearly drove off the road. The voice was right there, not on the radio, not in his head, but inches from his ear. His mouth went dry. He finally stole a glance to the passenger seat. It was still empty. Sort of. The seatbelt stretched across the chair, taut. And there, pressed faintly into the dirty fabric of the seat, was an indentation, as if something, was sitting there, breathing, watching him. Nathan jerked his eyes back to the road, swallowing hard. The miles crawled past. The darkness felt heavier now, like thick smoke swirling just outside the headlights. Then he saw the sign. Rest stop 2 miles. Relief flooded through him. If he could just get to the rest stop, maybe there would be people there. Lights. Safety. He pressed the gas pedal harder, the truck roaring down the highway. 2 minutes later, the rest stop came into view. A small cluster of bright lights in the middle of the blackness. A vending machine, a few parked cars, a bathroom. No people. But it didn't matter. He turned the wheel sharply, pulling into the parking lot. The truck rumbled to a stop. Nathan yanked the keys from the ignition, and everything went silent. No engine. No hum. Just the sound of his own shallow breathing. He unbuckled his seatbelt and fumbled for the door handle, ready to leap out, when a cold hand grabbed his wrist. Nathan screamed and wrenched his arm free. The door flew open, and he stumbled out onto the concrete, falling hard on his knees. He spun around. The cab was empty. The seatbelt on the passenger side dangled loose. Nathan scrambled to his feet and backed away from the truck, panting, sweat freezing against his skin despite the chill. For a long moment, he just stood there, staring. Nothing moved inside the Freightliner. Nothing. Maybe it was over. Maybe whatever had ridden with him had decided to stay behind. He took a few slow steps toward the bathroom building, trying to calm his racing heart. His boots crunched on gravel. The wind moaned through the empty parking lot. As he reached the door, he caught a reflection in the glass window. He froze. Standing behind him, inside the cab of the truck, visible in the side mirror, was a figure. Faint, gray, blurred like a photograph left out in the rain. Sitting perfectly upright in the passenger seat. Waiting. Nathan didn't move. He didn't breathe. The figure didn't move either. It just sat there, patient. And then, in the faint reflection, Nathan saw it lift one hand and beckon, slowly, one finger at a time. Nathan stood frozen, his heart hammering in his chest, eyes locked on the reflection in the mirror. The figure inside his truck didn't move, not yet. But Nathan could feel it. The air was thick with it. That presence, that thing that had been sitting next to him for hours, now seemed to fill the empty space between him and the truck. His breath came in shallow, quick gasps. For a long moment, neither of them moved. Then, the finger lifted again, slowly. A single, deliberate motion. Nathan's knees felt weak. He couldn't take his eyes off the figure. His body screamed at him to run, to get as far away as possible. But his legs wouldn't obey. He was rooted to the spot, like something invisible was holding him in place. He wanted to shout, to demand answers. What was this thing? Why had it been riding with him? Why had it chosen him? But his voice wouldn't come. It was like the air had thickened around him, suffocating him. The figure in the truck didn't move, but the way it tilted its head slightly, it was watching him, waiting, inviting him. Nathan's pulse pounded in his ears. It was almost like the thing was expecting him to come closer. A whisper of wind blew past, rustling the dry leaves in the parking lot. Everything around him felt distant, unreal, like he was watching it through a thick fog. "Get a grip," Nathan muttered to himself, shaking his head. Finally, he tore his eyes away from the mirror and turned his body toward the truck door. He reached for the handle. His hand shook. "It's just a trick of the light," he thought. "A reflection. Nothing more." But as his fingers brushed the cold metal handle, he heard something behind him. A sound that made his blood run cold. A slow, deliberate step. A footfall on the gravel. Nathan's heart skipped. He spun around, his breath caught in his throat. No one was there. No one. He blinked. He looked up and down the parking lot. Empty. Not a single soul in sight. But then, the door of the truck slammed shut. With a deafening crack, Nathan's body jerked back, a primal rush of fear surging through him. He took 2 quick steps away from the truck, heart pounding like a drum in his chest. His mind screamed for him to run, but his legs felt like lead. His eyes darted back to the truck. The side mirror. The figure was still there. Still sitting. Still waiting. It was no longer just a blurry shape. Now he could make out the details. The face, or what used to be a face, was pale, smooth, like a featureless mask. No eyes. No mouth. Just nothing. And yet, Nathan could feel its gaze. He could feel it seeing him. Another step. Nathan could see its hand again, still raised in that slow, inviting gesture. It wanted him to come closer. It knew he was afraid. And then, suddenly, something inside him snapped. It wasn't the fear anymore. It was anger. Anger at himself. Anger at this nightmare. He turned, facing the truck head-on, staring down the empty cab. "No," he whispered to himself, gritting his teeth. "Not tonight." He marched forward, fists clenched at his sides. No more running. No more hiding. With every step, the figure remained motionless, its hand still raised as if beckoning. Nathan reached the door. He yanked it open, the cool air rushing in. He glanced inside. The cab was as empty as it had ever been. The seat was just a seat. No figure. No face. No one. Nathan let out a long, shaky breath. He was trembling, but he couldn't tell if it was from relief or the lingering fear. But as his fingers brushed the seatbelt that had been fastened so tight earlier, he froze. It was buckled again. No, this can't be real. But the buckle was unmistakable. Tight. Secure. Something had been sitting there, had been watching him. And it was still there, still waiting. Without thinking, Nathan yanked the seatbelt free again, his hands trembling. He slammed the door shut behind him, backing away from the truck. His heart raced, blood thumping in his ears. Get in the truck. Drive away. Now. His legs finally obeyed. He ran around the truck, jumped into the driver's seat, and slammed the door behind him. His hands were shaking, the keys slipping from his fingers as he tried to start the engine. The engine roared to life. The truck jerked forward, and Nathan sped down the highway without looking back. But in the rearview mirror, as the truck tore through the night, Nathan saw something else. The figure. Still there. Still sitting in the passenger seat. The hand raised in that slow, deliberate gesture. And in the distance, beyond the highway lights, the road behind him was starting to fade. Not just the road, though. It was everything. Everything but him and that empty seat. Nathan's throat tightened. He was not alone. Nathan's foot pressed harder on the accelerator, the truck roaring down the empty highway. His eyes flicked back to the rearview mirror every few seconds, but the figure in the passenger seat remained there, motionless, waiting, watching, always watching. No, I'm not losing my mind. I'm not crazy. This is just stress, he thought, trying to convince himself. You're tired, Nathan. You're exhausted. That's all. The miles stretched on, but the weight in the cab seemed to grow heavier with each passing minute. The truck hummed like a living thing under him, the tires scraping against the road like they were scraping through his nerves. Suddenly, the figure in the passenger seat shifted. Nathan saw it out of the corner of his eye, the silhouette, no longer still. It leaned forward just a little, as though it was trying to get a closer look at him. He felt his stomach drop. He wasn't hallucinating. That was no trick of the light. It was real. It was real. The figure's head tilted slightly, as if observing his every movement. And then it spoke. A low, raspy whisper that crawled across his skin. You should have stayed in the cab, Nathan. Nathan's hands froze on the wheel, and his heart skipped a beat. His voice caught in his throat. Who was that? It wasn't his voice. It was different. Darker. Unrecognizable. He whipped his head to the side, eyes wide. There was no mistaking it now. The figure in the passenger seat had a face with a wide, gaping mouth, like someone had peeled the skin back from the skull and left it open. No eyes. Just dark, empty sockets. He screamed and jerked the wheel to the side, sending the truck skidding across the road. The engine roared as he fought to regain control, his fingers gripping the wheel so hard his knuckles turned white. The truck lurched and slammed into the gravel shoulder, bouncing hard before coming to a screeching stop. Nathan panted, gasping for air, eyes wide as he stared at the passenger seat. Nothing. The seat was empty. The road was silent again. Only the distant hum of the engine filled the air. He could still feel it, the presence. But it was gone. For now. But his mind was spinning. That voice. That face. What had just happened? Nathan sat there, hands shaking on the wheel. His thoughts were a jumbled mess, racing faster than his truck ever could. What was going on? Was this some sort of curse? Or was he really losing his mind? He glanced at the dashboard clock. It was 2:47 a.m. Hadn't it been 1:30 just a few minutes ago? A sudden realization hit him like a punch to the gut. The time. The clock. It's wrong. Time isn't right. He fumbled for his phone, unlocking it with shaking hands. The battery was almost dead. He cursed under his breath, swiping through the screen. The GPS? The map? He froze. It was all wrong. The map was showing roads he didn't recognize, towns that didn't exist, and worst of all, the truck was still moving. The blue dot was still slowly moving forward, even though he was parked right here at the side of the road. He looked up, out of the windshield, and then back at the map. The road was empty, dead silent. But he wasn't on the road he thought he was. Somewhere in his gut, he knew the truth. The twisted reality of it all was finally sinking in. The trucker's route, wasn't real. None of this was real. Nathan's eyes shot back to the passenger seat. He could see his own reflection in the glass, pale and wide-eyed, but the seat next to him was empty. There was nothing there. The silence stretched on. And then, a flash of something, a shadow. The figure again, standing at the edge of his vision, just outside the window. Nathan snapped his head to the side. But there was nothing. No one. Just darkness. Just the road. His breath came in ragged gasps. He opened the door, his legs shaking as he stumbled out into the night, away from the truck. The cold air hit him like a slap, but it wasn't enough to clear his head. Get away from the truck, he thought, stumbling a few steps into the gravel. Get away from the truck and... Before he could finish the thought, a hand gripped his shoulder, cold as ice. He spun around, the breath freezing in his chest. There, standing in front of him, was the figure. No longer seated, no longer waiting. It was now standing tall, its blackened, empty sockets fixed on him. A grin, wide and distorted, spread across its face, stretching unnaturally far. "You were always meant to be here, Nathan." And then, the most horrible realization hit him. This wasn't some creature, some random evil force. This was the truth. The truck. The road. The endless driving. Nathan wasn't driving. He had never been driving. He was the passenger. The figure stepped closer, and Nathan's legs gave out beneath him. As he collapsed, he realized something far worse than the figure in the seat. He had never made it out. This was where he had always been. Nathan's scream was drowned by the roar of the truck's engine, still running in the distance. Still driving. But now he knew. The truck never stopped. And neither did he. Story 2. The Man with No Face. It was late, later than Anna realized. She'd been driving for hours, the glow of her headlights cutting through the pitch-black road. The small country lane twisted and turned through the hills of Scotland, a place she'd never thought she would be, let alone in the middle of nowhere. Anna was used to traveling for work, but tonight, something felt off. The air was colder than usual, and the silence felt like it was swallowing the world around her. She hadn't passed a car in nearly an hour, and her phone had no signal. Her destination wasn't far now, just a small cottage she'd rented through an online service. A quiet place to unwind after weeks of intense business meetings and presentations. But with every mile she drove, she felt more and more like the road was swallowing her whole, pulling her into an unfamiliar place where she didn't belong. The radio crackled in and out, nothing but static and an occasional burst of music, but nothing she could make out. She twisted the dial, trying to find something clear. The clock on her dashboard read 11:42 p.m. She cursed softly under her breath, wishing she had arrived earlier. Suddenly, her headlights caught something. A figure standing at the edge of the road, just outside the beams of light. At first, it looked like a shadow, but as she drove closer, the shape became clearer. A man. Or at least, what appeared to be a man. Anna slowed the car instinctively, her grip tightening on the wheel. He was tall, unnaturally tall, and he stood motionless, facing away from the road. His clothes were dark, almost blending into the night around him. A long coat, like something out of an old movie, billowed slightly in the breeze. But it was his face, or the lack of it, that made her stomach churn. It wasn't that he didn't have a face, it was that there was nothing there. No features at all, just smooth, pale skin where his face should have been. No eyes, no nose, no mouth, just an empty, flat space where the human face should be. Anna's breath caught in her throat. Her mind raced, trying to make sense of what she was seeing. This couldn't be real. It had to be some sort of trick of the light, some bizarre illusion. Or maybe, she thought with a chill running down her spine, it was someone in costume, trying to scare her. But the man didn't move. Not an inch. He was like a statue, rooted to the spot. No car in sight. No indication that he had been walking. Just standing there, waiting. She didn't know what compelled her to stop, but the car's tires crunched to a halt just a few yards away from him. She stared at him, her heart pounding in her chest. Her hands were shaking, but she gripped the wheel tighter, trying to steady herself. She couldn't see his eyes, but somehow, she knew he was looking at her. The weight of his gaze felt suffocating, like he could see straight through the windshield, straight into her soul. Anna fought the urge to roll up the windows and drive away, to ignore it and pretend this had never happened. But something about the figure, his stillness, his unnatural presence, kept her rooted in place. She stared at him, trying to understand what she was seeing, but no matter how hard she looked, he just stood there. Minutes passed. Or maybe it was seconds. Time felt strange, distorted. Then, without warning, the man tilted his head slowly, almost mechanically, as though he had just realized she was there. And that's when Anna heard it. A sound, soft and eerie, rising up from the depths of her chest and seeping into her bones. A whisper. "Don't look away." The words chilled her to the core. They weren't spoken out loud. They weren't even audible. But the message was clear, clear as if it were etched into her mind, as if the man himself had planted it there. Anna's fingers trembled. She wanted to drive away, to escape this nightmare. But for some reason, she couldn't bring herself to do it. Her eyes were locked on the figure, the strange, empty place where his face should have been. Who are you?" she whispered to herself, though she didn't expect an answer. The man didn't speak. His head remained tilted, and that empty, faceless gaze seemed to pierce right through her. The whisper had faded, but the feeling remained, like a cold breath on the back of her neck. She had to get away. She had to move. But the moment she shifted the car into drive, the headlights flickered, once, twice, then went out completely. Anna gasped, fumbling for the switch, her heart leaping in her chest. The world outside was swallowed by complete darkness, and she could hear nothing but the rapid pounding of her own heartbeat. In that instant, everything felt wrong. The silence felt suffocating. The weight of the man's presence felt so much heavier. Her fingers shook as she tried to restart the car, but it wouldn't budge. The engine sputtered and died. A sickening realization crept through her. She was trapped. The darkness seemed to press in from all sides, and the man, still standing in the road, took a slow, deliberate step forward. Anna's breath hitched in her throat. The silence was suffocating, the only sound the pounding of her heartbeat. She fumbled with the car's ignition, but nothing happened. The engine had died completely, and no matter how many times she turned the key, it refused to start. The man was still standing there, just a few feet away from her car now. His posture was unerringly still, and yet he seemed to be drawing closer, inch by inch, as if he were being pulled toward her. There was no noise, no movement that could be seen, yet the sensation that he was closing the gap between them was palpable. Anna gripped the steering wheel, her knuckles turning white. Think, her mind screamed. She needed to do something. Anything. Her mind raced back to what had happened when she first saw him. The feeling of being watched. The whisper in her head. "Don't look away." It was like something had rooted her to that moment, as if she were trapped in some kind of terrible spell. But why? Why her? She tried the headlights again, but still nothing. Her only source of light was the dim glow from her dashboard, casting eerie shadows inside the car. She looked out the window again, expecting to see the figure even closer, but when her eyes locked on the road, he was still standing exactly where he had been. And then, as if to answer her unspoken question, the figure began to move. Slowly. His body shifted, his feet making no sound as he walked toward her. The darkness around him seemed to bend and distort as he moved, like the very air was thickening with every step he took. Anna's breath caught in her throat. She wanted to look away. She wanted to blink, to escape this nightmarish scene, but her body wouldn't obey. It was like the man was pulling her gaze toward him with an unseen force, as if her eyes were trapped in his. The man didn't speak. He didn't need to. The air was charged with something unnatural, something ancient. Anna could feel it in her bones. Her hands trembled so violently that the car shook slightly, but she couldn't stop staring at him. With each step, The darkness around him seemed to grow, making it harder for Anna to see anything else. The world outside her window felt like it was falling away, leaving her in a void where only he existed. Then, at last, he stopped. A mere foot away from her window now. She could see the shape of his dark coat, the billowing fabric moving ever so slightly with the breeze. But the face, the place where his face should have been, smooth, flat, and featureless, was all she could focus on. A pale, empty surface, like the skin of a mannequin. Her pulse raced. Was he even alive? Was he human? She opened her mouth to scream, but her voice failed her. It was as if something was clogging her throat, blocking her breath. The terror was so intense that it paralyzed her. She couldn't move, couldn't speak, couldn't even blink. The man leaned closer, just enough for her to see the outline of his face, or lack of it, in greater detail. The air around them felt heavier, colder. Then it happened. The whisper came again, this time louder. "You can't escape." Anna's skin went cold. The words didn't just echo in her ears. They were inside her head, wrapping around her thoughts, seeping into her mind. She could almost feel his presence inside her skull, a dark, suffocating force invading her every thought. A tear slid down her cheek. She couldn't help it. The fear was too much. She tried to move again. Her hands found the door handle, but it wouldn't budge. The car door was locked. She looked at the window, desperate to roll it down, but the controls were frozen in place. It was as if the entire car had become part of the nightmare, trapping her in this isolated, silent world with a faceless man. And just as the terror was reaching its peak, something strange happened. A sound. A faint rumble, like distant thunder. But it wasn't coming from the sky. It was coming from the ground. The man didn't move, but Anna could feel the vibrations beneath her feet. The road seemed to shake, the air crackling with a strange energy. The ground beneath her car trembled, as if something deep below was awakening, something ancient and powerful. She pressed her hands against the window, her breath fogging the glass as she peered through it. And for the first time, she noticed something else. In the distance, just beyond the faceless figure, there was a faint light. A flicker. It was too far to be her headlights, too steady to be a star. She didn't know what it was, but the light was moving, slowly, deliberately. It wasn't just a flash of light. It was alive. A pulsing glow, dim and unsteady, like the heart of the world was beating just beneath her feet. Was it another person? She wondered. But when she looked back at the man, at the faceless figure who had haunted her for what felt like forever, he was gone. Vanished. Into thin air. Her pulse thundered in her ears. The silence was deafening, the absence of his presence somehow worse than his nearness. She didn't know whether to feel relieved or terrified. But before she could think clearly, the glow from the distance intensified, its light growing brighter and stronger, casting strange shadows across the road. And then, with no warning, the ground shook harder. Anna's car was suddenly thrown into motion, not by her own doing. It jolted forward, the tires screeching as the engine roared to life once more. But it wasn't her foot on the gas. The car was moving, faster than before, and she had no control over it. Anna's heart was racing. The car hurtled down the road faster than she could comprehend, the tires screeching as the engine roared to life without her input. It was as if the car itself had become alive, as if it had a mind of its own, pulling her into the darkness. She slammed her foot on the brake, but it had no effect. The car kept accelerating, tearing through the empty road, the headlights illuminating nothing but the blackness ahead. The world outside the car felt distorted, like it was slipping in and out of focus, the trees along the road blurring into streaks of gray. Panic gripped her chest. What was happening? Was she dreaming? Was this some sort of trick? No, this wasn't a dream. This was real. She could feel the cold sweat on her skin, the sharpness of the night air cutting through her like a knife. The tremors in her hands were real. The fear in her chest was real. She tried again to wrestle control of the wheel, but her hands were shaking too much to grip it firmly. It was as if the car was pulling her forward, dragging her deeper into the darkness. She glanced frantically at the dashboard. The clock was stuck at 11:42 p.m. The same time it had been before. The same time. A shiver ran down her spine. The seconds weren't ticking by. The world wasn't moving forward. It was as if time itself had stopped, frozen in place, and she was stuck in a loop she couldn't escape. And then, the light. That strange, pulsing light. It was brighter now. It wasn't just flickering in the distance anymore. It was close, too close, and it was glowing, a soft, eerie glow that seemed to vibrate through the air. The road ahead was now bathed in that light, casting long shadows that seemed to stretch toward her like fingers reaching out to pull her in. Her stomach churned, and for a moment, she thought she might throw up. But she didn't. She couldn't. Her body was locked in place, just like the car, moving forward without her consent. She couldn't think, couldn't focus. And then, in the corner of her eye, she saw him again. The faceless man. He was standing just ahead of her, his form blurred by the light, but there was no mistaking him. His body was the same, tall, cloaked, his head turned slightly, that empty face staring into the void. Anna froze. Her heart pounded in her chest. The car continued to drive straight toward him, as if it had no intention of stopping. Her hands were still on the wheel, but it wasn't her controlling the motion. It was like the car was locked into an invisible force that was pushing her toward the man. As the car grew closer, she could see the details of the road around him. The ground cracked and darkened, as if the very earth had begun to rot. The trees were twisted, their branches bare, reaching toward the sky in skeletal shapes. There was an unnatural stillness in the air, a silence that swallowed everything. The world had become a twisted version of itself, decaying and fading into nothingness. And then, without warning, the man moved. It was subtle at first, just the slightest tilt of his head, as if he had sensed her presence. But then, his body shifted. Slowly, deliberately, he started to walk toward the car, each step coming with a terrible, slow certainty. Anna's breath caught in her throat. She couldn't look away. She couldn't even blink. As the man came closer, his presence seemed to fill the space around her, filling the car, the air, her lungs. The emptiness of his face, the smooth, featureless surface, seemed to draw her in, pulling her thoughts into a spiral of terror. It was like staring into a void, an endless abyss. "Don't look away," the whisper returned. It wasn't a voice in her ears, it was inside her mind. His words weren't spoken aloud, they were a thought, planted deep in her brain, as if he had control over her very consciousness. She wanted to scream. She wanted to run. But her body wouldn't respond. She was frozen, trapped in her own fear. The car lurched forward again, closer and closer to the faceless man, who now stood directly in front of the hood, his empty face staring down at her through the windshield. The glow from the strange light behind him bathed him in a sickly, otherworldly hue. And then, just as she thought the car would crash into him, it stopped. Abruptly, like someone had slammed on the brakes, but there was no screeching of tires. No sudden halt. Just stillness. The man didn't move. He was standing in the exact same position, his featureless face locked onto her. His presence was overwhelming, suffocating. A cold sweat dripped down Anna's neck. She was shaking, her hands frozen in place, her eyes wide with terror. Suddenly, the man's form began to change. It wasn't noticeable at first, but as she watched, his figure started to distort, as if the very fabric of his being was unraveling. His body stretched, lengthening, twisting, until it no longer resembled a man at all. It became something other, something monstrous. A long, contorted shadow with no defined shape, just an endless blackness that filled the space around her. Anna gasped, her heart pounding in her chest as the car shuddered beneath her. She wanted to scream, to move, to run. But it was as if her body had been paralyzed by the sheer force of whatever the man had become. The darkness reached out toward her, extending like tendrils, crawling over the hood of the car toward her window. She could feel the coldness of it, seeping into the air around her, wrapping around her body like an invisible vice. And then the voice came again. This time, it wasn't a whisper. It was a low, guttural sound, vibrating in the air, coming from all around her. "You are mine now." Anna's world was spinning. The air felt thick, suffocating, and every breath she took felt like it was harder to get. The darkness around her had turned alive, wrapping itself around the car, pressing against the windows as if it were trying to break in. The voice, the one that had come from nowhere, still echoed in her head. "You are mine now." She didn't know what it meant. She didn't know what it wanted. But one thing was clear. Whatever this was, it was far from normal. The man, or whatever it had become, was not just a figure. He was something ancient, something that had existed long before her, long before this world. The air inside the car was freezing, and her breath formed small clouds against the glass. Her hand shook uncontrollably as she tried to start the car again. But the engine refused to turn over. The lights flickered and went out, leaving her in total darkness, surrounded by the oppressive blackness that had swallowed the world outside. She tried to open the door, but it was stuck. No matter how much she pulled and pushed, the handle wouldn't budge. It was as if the car itself had turned into a prison, trapping her inside. The tendrils of darkness pressed harder against the windows, the space between her and the faceless man now filled with an unnatural force. The once still road ahead had become an endless, swirling vortex, as if the world itself was collapsing inward. She thought she saw something move in the distance, shapes, like figures, rising from the ground. They weren't human. They were tall and grotesque, their bodies twisted and malformed, their features shifting and changing with every blink. They were the remnants of something that had once lived, but now they were nothing more than hollow echoes of a forgotten time. Anna pressed her back against the seat, her breath ragged. She could feel the walls of the car closing in on her, the suffocating pressure of the unseen force outside pushing against her, urging her to panic. And then she felt it. A hand. Or rather, something that resembled a hand, cold and clammy, pressed against the side of her face. She froze. Her eyes darted to the side, but she couldn't see anything. No one was there. The hand had disappeared, leaving only the lingering cold where it had touched her skin. Her pulse quickened. "Don't look away." The whisper was there again. Only this time, it was different. It wasn't just in her mind. She could feel it, vibrating through the air, seeping into her very being. It was like a command, an irresistible force pushing her to obey. She wanted to turn, to look away, to escape, but she couldn't. Her body refused to move. The faceless figure had returned to the front of the car, standing just outside her window, his form barely visible in the darkness. His body had stretched and twisted, growing taller, thinner. The air around him seemed to warp and bend with his presence, like the laws of reality themselves were beginning to break down. His empty face was still there, but now it seemed to be growing, expanding, the smooth skin stretching until it covered his entire head, forming an unnatural, grotesque shape. And then, without warning, he spoke. "You are mine, and I will never let you go." Anna's heart skipped a beat. The words didn't just come from his lips. They weren't spoken at all. They were inside her head, a voice that didn't exist in the physical world, but still reached her mind with terrifying clarity. The air around her seemed to darken even further, becoming thick and heavy. She felt herself growing weaker, as if the very essence of her being was being drained away by the force of the figure's presence. "I have been waiting for you," the voice whispered again, colder this time, more desperate. Anna couldn't take it anymore. She had to escape. She had to do something. With every ounce of strength she had left, she slammed her fist into the window, but it didn't break. The glass didn't even crack. It was as if the very world around her had become impervious to her attempts to escape. The tendrils of darkness began to slip into the car, curling around her arms, her legs, wrapping themselves around her throat. The pressure was unbearable. She couldn't breathe. She couldn't move. But then, in the midst of the chaos, something snapped. It wasn't a sound. It wasn't a visible shift. It was an overwhelming sense of release, as if the weight of everything around her suddenly lifted just for a moment. The darkness pulled back, retreating like a wave receding from the shore. For the first time in what felt like hours, Anna could breathe. She gasped, taking in a sharp breath as the pressure around her neck loosened. She didn't know what had happened, but she was still alive, still conscious, still there. But when she looked out the window again, the faceless man was gone. Gone. The road was still dark. The trees still twisted and bare. The strange light that had once pulsed in the distance was now a faint glow, fading like a star burning out in the sky. Anna blinked, still not fully understanding what had just occurred. She wanted to believe it was a hallucination, that everything she had seen and heard was some twisted nightmare brought on by exhaustion. But deep down, she knew it wasn't. The world around her wasn't just twisted. It was broken. And the faceless man wasn't just a figure in the night. He was something more. And he was coming for her. Anna sat frozen in the driver's seat, her hands trembling as they gripped the steering wheel. The world outside was still, eerily quiet. The strange light that had once flickered in the distance had completely vanished, leaving nothing but the empty road stretching into the blackness. The shadows of twisted trees lined the edges, their skeletal branches reaching out like fingers, but the faceless man, he was gone. Her mind was a blur. What had just happened? The darkness that had consumed the car, the terrifying presence of the faceless figure, it all felt like a dream. A nightmare. But it wasn't. She could still feel the lingering cold on her skin, the echo of his voice in her head. "You are mine now." The words kept replaying in her mind, a chilling reminder of what she had just experienced. She needed to leave. She had to get out of here, away from whatever this place had become. But as she shifted the car into drive, something caught her eye. A figure. A shadow moving in the distance, barely visible in the fog that had suddenly appeared, thick and oppressive. At first, she thought it was just another illusion, a trick of the light, or her mind playing games with her. But then, she saw it more clearly. The figure was walking toward her, slowly, purposefully. The long, dark coat, the same unsettling posture. It was him. The man with no face. Her heart dropped into her stomach. She slammed her foot on the gas, but the car didn't move. The engine was sputtering again, and no matter how much she tried to rev it, it refused to start. Panic set in. This couldn't be happening. She had to get away. The figure was closer now, moving silently through the mist, his empty, featureless face staring at her from a distance. Her pulse hammered in her chest. Every instinct in her screamed at her to run, but she couldn't. The figure stopped, just a few feet from her car. His presence filled the space around her, suffocating her with its weight. And then, just as he had done before, the voice came again. "It's time." The words were soft, almost a whisper, but they were loud enough to shake her to her core. Anna's breath caught in her throat. She couldn't move, couldn't think. She was paralyzed by the force of the man's presence, as if his very being had rooted her to the spot. "You have been running for too long, Anna," the voice said, its tone cold and final. "But there is nowhere left to hide." A sudden surge of panic flooded through her. How does he know my name? The man began to move again, slowly, his feet gliding across the ground as if he were floating. He didn't walk like a normal person. There was something unnatural about the way he moved, like he was more shadow than flesh. Anna's breath quickened. She couldn't take it anymore. She had to get out. She had to escape. With every ounce of strength she had, she yanked the car door open. It creaked, as if the world itself was reluctant to let her leave. But it opened. She stumbled out of the car, her legs shaking beneath her, and looked around. The road was no longer the same. The trees were now twisted and gnarled, their roots crawling across the asphalt like serpents. The fog had thickened, and the air was heavy with a strange, suffocating energy. The world felt wrong, as if it had been bent and broken, twisted into something it was never meant to be. And there, standing in front of her, was the faceless man. He wasn't moving anymore. He was simply standing there, his body still, his head tilted in a way that made Anna's blood run cold. "You shouldn't have come," he said, his voice echoing around her like a whisper in a dream. Anna's knees buckled. She collapsed to the ground, unable to look away from the figure in front of her. Her breath came in ragged gasps, and she could feel the darkness closing in. "I have been waiting for you," the voice continued. "You are the one who has been chosen." The words hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. Anna's mind raced. Chosen? What did that mean? Why her? Why had this been happening to her? And then, as if the world itself was revealing a terrible secret, something clicked. Her memories. Bits and pieces she had pushed aside, things she had tried to forget, all began to surface. She remembered the old house. The one that had been abandoned for years. The house that her friends dared her to explore when she was younger. She remembered the strange feeling she had gotten when she stepped inside, the sense that something was watching her. She remembered hearing whispers, feeling something cold brush against her skin. The man with no face had been there. He had been watching her long before tonight. Suddenly, it all made sense. The darkness, the whispers, the strange feeling that had followed her since that night. It wasn't just a random encounter. It was planned. She had been drawn here, led down this road by something far older than she could understand. "You are part of this now," the man said, his voice chillingly calm. "You always have been." A wave of realization hit her like a tidal wave. She wasn't just a victim of circumstance. She was part of something far more sinister. The man with no face wasn't just after her. He had always been after her. The ground beneath her began to tremble, and the darkness around her seemed to grow, expanding outward, swallowing the road, the trees, the entire world. The fog thickened, and the shadows stretched toward her, pulling her in. She was no longer just a victim. She was the key to something much darker. "It's time for you to join us," the man whispered, as the darkness consumed her completely. And then, everything went black. Story 3. Blacktop Graveyard. Chapter 1. The Road That Never Ends. Underscore 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 underscore. It was a night like any other. The sky stretched overhead, ink black and dotted with stars that twinkled faintly in the cold, crisp air. The highway was eerily quiet, save for the hum of Jack Carter's truck engine as it cut through the vast emptiness of the Nevada desert. Jack had been on the road for what felt like days. He was a long-haul trucker, used to the loneliness of the open road. But tonight, something felt off. The stillness in the air was unsettling. Even the usual buzz of his radio seemed distant and muffled, as if the world itself had gone silent. He flicked the switch on the dashboard, trying to tune into a station, but all he got was static. He sighed, rubbing his eyes. Another long stretch of road, another empty night. His eyes wandered to the rearview mirror, catching a glimpse of the road behind him. But there was nothing there. Just the desert, endless and desolate. Jack had been down this highway countless times, a well-known route between cities in Nevada, but tonight it was different. The pavement stretched before him like a black ribbon, disappearing into the darkness. There were no exits, no signs of life. Only the endless stretch of blacktop. He glanced at his watch. It was nearing 3 a.m. But the world outside looked like it hadn't changed since he first hit the road that evening. No towns, no streetlights. Just the road. "Maybe I'm just tired," Jack muttered to himself, wiping his face with the back of his hand. The dim headlights from his truck only illuminated the narrow path in front of him, casting eerie shadows on the edge of the road. And then, through the silence, he saw it. At first, it was just a shape, a shadow in the distance. But as he drove closer, it became clear. A figure, standing in the middle of the road. It was too tall to be a person, its form stretching and distorting in a way that didn't feel right. Jack's foot hovered over the brake, a sense of unease creeping up his spine. He wasn't one to get spooked easily, but this felt wrong. The figure didn't move. It was just there, standing like a monument on the empty stretch of road. Its outline was jagged, like something unnatural, something that didn't belong in the world. Jack slammed his foot down on the brake, the truck screeching to a halt. For a moment, everything was still. The only sound was the idling engine, the faint whir of the tires on the pavement. Jack's heart raced in his chest as he stared at the figure ahead. It didn't speak. It didn't move. It was just there. And then the sound came. A low hum, like a vibration in the air, one that seemed to come from everywhere at once. It filled the truck cab, vibrating through his bones. Jack's hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly that his knuckles turned white. His breath came out in shallow gasps as he stared, wide-eyed, at the dark shape. For a moment, he wondered if he had fallen asleep behind the wheel, if this was all some twisted dream. But the sensation, the hum, the feeling in his chest, was real. Too real to be imagined. He slowly reached for the door handle, his fingers trembling. Whatever it was on the road, it wasn't natural. He had to get out and see what was happening. Maybe there was an explanation. Maybe it was a prank, or some kind of roadwork equipment that got left out in the middle of nowhere. But as he swung the door open, the humming stopped. And then a voice. "Don't get out!" The voice was quiet, barely a whisper, but it carried with it a weight, a warning that seemed to echo through the very air. Jack froze, his foot still on the ground outside the truck, his hand gripping the door. The voice wasn't from the radio. It wasn't from anyone outside. It came from within the truck. He slowly turned his head, his eyes scanning the truck's interior. No one was there. The cabin was empty, save for the faint smell of stale coffee and the half-eaten sandwich he had left on the seat earlier. But there was no one else. "Don't go closer!" The voice came again, more urgent this time. His heart pounded in his chest, his mind racing with questions. He quickly closed the door, locking it with a trembling hand. The truck's engine rumbled in response, as if it, too, was anxious to get moving. But just as he shifted the truck back into gear, something caught his eye. Out the driver's side window, he saw something move. Just a flicker, a shadow in the distance. A shape, shifting and warping like it wasn't quite real. And then it was gone. His breath hitched. Jack's eyes darted to the rearview mirror. The figure was gone, but something felt wrong, something he couldn't put his finger on. The hum from before started again, this time more intense, vibrating through the truck like the ground beneath it was shifting. Without thinking, Jack slammed the gas pedal down, his truck roaring to life as he sped down the highway, away from the strange figure. But the farther he drove, the more it seemed like the road never ended. The blacktop stretched out endlessly before him. No curves, no turns, no exit signs. It was as if the road was alive. And the hum, it followed. He glanced at the rearview mirror again. The dark shape was still there, just out of sight, but Jack could feel it, pressing in on him. The hum grew louder, the air thickening with something he couldn't explain. He pushed the pedal harder, desperate to outrun whatever it was that had attached itself to him. But the road wasn't giving up. It was never going to end. Jack had entered the blacktop graveyard, and there was no turning back. Jack's hands gripped the steering wheel so tight his fingers ached, but it didn't stop the creeping sense of dread gnawing at him. The truck roared down the road, the tires humming against the blacktop, but no matter how fast he drove, the horizon never seemed to change. The lights from the truck barely illuminated the path ahead, stretching far into the night, as though the road itself had no end. He glanced nervously at the dashboard clock. 3:15 a.m. But it didn't feel like time had moved at all. It was as if the minutes were stretching into infinity, and the road was, well, it was just there. A never-ending stretch of pavement with no signposts, no exits, no signs of life. The hum had started again, faint at first but growing louder, like a swarm of bees vibrating through the air. The noise rattled his bones, made the hairs on the back of his neck stand up. It seemed to come from all directions, beneath him, around him, in the very air. He couldn't escape it. It was like the hum was part of the road itself, a pulse in the darkness. Jack clenched his jaw and slammed the accelerator down, pushing the truck faster. His eyes darted to the rearview mirror, but there was nothing. The figure was gone. The shadow, the thing standing in the middle of the road, had vanished without a trace, but its presence lingered. It lingered like a bad memory, gnawing at the edges of his mind. Why hadn't he stopped? Why hadn't he turned back when he had the chance? But now there was no turning back. He had driven far enough into this stretch of empty road that he could no longer be sure where he was. He glanced at the side window, watching the endless desert blur past, the occasional scrub of dry bushes standing out like black silhouettes against the barren landscape. Nothing else. Nothing. Suddenly, a flicker of movement caught his eye. Jack's heart leaped into his throat. He turned his head to the side, just in time to see something dart across the road, too fast to be a person. It was a shadow, something fleeting, unnatural. His foot slammed on the brake, the truck screeching to a halt. His breath caught in his chest. Was it real? Had he seen it? He didn't know. He wasn't sure of anything anymore. For a moment, all he could hear was the deafening silence that had settled around him. The hum had stopped. The truck idled in the middle of the road, its headlights casting long beams of light into the empty desert, but the shadow had disappeared. Jack wasn't sure what he expected. Maybe he had imagined it, but that nagging feeling at the back of his mind told him otherwise. Something was wrong. Something was very wrong. He took a deep breath and shook his head. No. He had to keep moving. There was no time to second-guess himself. He had a job to do. He had to finish this run. But the road? It was starting to feel like a trap. The truck roared back to life as Jack shifted it into gear, but before he could drive off, something unexpected happened. The radio crackled to life. At first, Jack thought it was just static, the usual kind of interference that came with the isolated stretches of desert. But then, amidst the static, there was a voice. A voice. Low. Faint. Jack! It was his name, clear as day, but it didn't come from the radio. It came from somewhere else, from inside the truck, as if someone was whispering in his ear. He froze, his breath catching in his throat. His eyes darted around the cabin. No one was there. "Jack, you shouldn't be here!" The voice grew more urgent, panicked, as if the speaker was desperately trying to warn him. The hum started again, this time louder, vibrating through his chest, rattling the truck. His hands went cold as he gripped the steering wheel. The voice, was it someone else? Someone who had been here before him? Someone who had driven this road and gotten trapped in whatever nightmare it was. "It's not real, Jack. None of it's real." The voice cut off abruptly, leaving Jack with a cold, empty silence. His heart pounded in his chest. He wasn't sure if he should turn the truck around and drive back the way he came, or if he should just keep going. But deep down, he knew it wouldn't matter. No matter which way he went, he was still stuck in the same place. The same road. The same endless blacktop. Suddenly, the headlights flickered. For a split second, everything went dark. Jack slammed his hand on the dashboard, but the lights returned just as quickly. He didn't even want to think about it. The longer he stayed on this road, the more he could feel himself losing his grip on reality. But that wasn't the worst part. In the distance, just barely visible through the fog that had started to roll in, Jack saw something else. Something new. It was a faint shape at first, something he couldn't quite make out. But as he got closer, the shape became clearer. A signpost. It was old, rusted, its surface covered in layers of dust and grime. Jack couldn't read the words on it, but it felt wrong. Like it shouldn't be there. It was placed too far out in the middle of the desert, far from any town or highway exit. It was as if it had appeared out of nowhere. He slowed the truck down, his instincts telling him to stop. His fingers itched to grab the wheel and turn, to just drive away from the sign and leave it behind. But instead, he stopped the truck completely, the engine idling softly in the stillness. The sign was there, looming in front of him like a monument, its words obscured by the layers of dust. He stepped out of the truck, his boots crunching against the gravel beneath him. He walked toward it slowly, his heart hammering in his chest. As he approached, the sign became clearer. The words were faint, scratched into the metal like they had been carved by hand, scratched out by something with great effort. "Welcome to the Blacktop Graveyard." Jack froze, the blood draining from his face. "What the hell?" he whispered to himself, the words hanging in the air like a curse. Before he could think of turning around, the air shifted. A shadow seemed to rise from the ground, swirling around him like a living thing. Jack's eyes darted in every direction as the darkness began to close in, suffocating the very space around him. The road beneath him trembled, as if the ground itself was awakening. And then, just as quickly as it all began, the hum stopped. But the silence that followed was worse. Much worse. The silence that followed the eerie sign felt suffocating. Jack stood frozen for a moment, his eyes locked onto the rusted metal post. The words burned into his mind. "Welcome to the Blacktop Graveyard." His heart pounded in his chest, and his breath came in shallow bursts. The desert stretched out before him in every direction, barren and unyielding. The road behind him was just as empty, stretching into the dark void of night. There was nothing but him, the truck, and that damned sign. The shadow that had risen from the ground seemed to pulse, its dark form swirling around him. Jack wanted to run, to jump back into the truck and drive away, but his legs felt like they were made of stone. The air felt heavy, oppressive, as though the very earth beneath him was closing in. A voice echoed in his mind, the voice from before, the one that had warned him. "Don't stay! Don't stay here!" But it was too late. The moment Jack had stepped off the truck, the world had changed. He could feel it in the air, the way the ground trembled beneath his boots, the way the wind seemed to whisper in a language he couldn't understand. The whispering winds grew louder, the words incomprehensible, as though the very earth was speaking to him. His pulse quickened. The shadow at his feet continued to grow, twisting and curling like it was alive, reaching toward him. Jack took a step back, then another, his boots crunching against the gravel, but the shadow seemed to follow. His eyes darted around, looking for an escape, but there was nothing. And then it came. The sound. A soft scraping, like nails on metal, coming from behind him. Jack whipped around, his heart leaping into his throat. There, not far from the sign, was the truck. It had been moved, almost imperceptibly, but now it was facing the opposite direction, the headlights flickering like dying stars. Jack's breath caught. He hadn't heard the truck move. The engine hadn't roared to life. And yet, somehow, it had turned around. His eyes darted to the rearview mirror, but the glass was black. Nothing reflected in it. There was no one inside. A low hum filled the air again, but this time, it felt different. It wasn't just a noise. It was a presence vibrating in the air, in the ground beneath his feet. Jack instinctively stepped back toward the truck, his breath coming faster, but as he moved, he noticed something else. There, at the edge of his vision, in the corner of the road, something was moving. A figure. A shadow. But it wasn't the same as before. This one was different. It was taller. Its outline was jagged, like broken glass, and it seemed to shimmer in the darkness. Jack could barely make out the shape as it inched toward him, step by unnatural step. He turned back to the truck, his hands shaking. The doors were still locked. He had no idea how the truck had turned around, but in that moment, he felt more certain than ever that something was wrong with this place. Something that didn't belong. "Get in the truck, Jack!" The voice from earlier echoed in his head again, louder this time, more frantic. "Don't look back. Just get in and drive." His instinct screamed at him to listen. Without wasting another second, he bolted toward the driver's side, his feet pounding against the ground. But just as he reached for the handle, a cold, clammy hand touched his shoulder. Jack froze. The hand was cold, impossibly cold, and it sent a jolt of ice through his body. He turned around slowly, dreading what he might see. There, standing behind him, was the figure. It was no longer just a shadow. It had form. It had substance. The thing was tall, taller than any person he had ever seen. Its body was thin and stretched, its limbs impossibly long, its hands too large for its frame. And its face. Jack recoiled in horror. The face wasn't a face at all. It was just a blank, featureless void, like a smooth mask of pale skin, empty and hollow. A sharp, guttural noise filled the air. Was it a laugh? A growl? Jack couldn't tell. His throat tightened, his body frozen in terror. The thing leaned closer, its featureless face almost touching his own. It reached out, its long fingers brushing against his cheek with a coldness that seemed to seep into his very bones. "You shouldn't have come here," it whispered, the voice hollow, a sickening echo that resonated deep within Jack's chest. Before Jack could react, the shadowy figure jerked back, as if it had been pulled away by some invisible force. It moved quickly, disappearing into the darkness with a fluidity that was both unnatural and terrifying. Jack didn't think. His body moved on instinct, and before he knew it, he was inside the truck, slamming the door shut and locking it. His hands fumbled with the ignition, but he could barely hold the key steady, his fingers trembling violently. The hum had stopped, but the weight of the silence was suffocating. The truck roared to life. Jack slammed his foot onto the gas pedal, the truck lurching forward as it sped down the road. But as he glanced out the side window, his stomach twisted in knots. The road was no longer the same. The landscape had changed, but not in the way he expected. The endless stretch of desert was gone. Instead, there were gravestones, thousands of them, stretching into the distance, like a forgotten cemetery. Each gravestone was different, each one more decayed than the last, their inscriptions worn away by time and neglect. Jack slammed on the brakes, the truck skidding to a halt. His heart pounded in his chest as he stared out at the scene in front of him. He had never seen this before. He had been driving the same stretch of road for years, but this was something else. The hum started again, louder this time, vibrating through the truck like an unstoppable force. And then, in the distance, Jack saw it. The figure was back. It was standing in the middle of the road, waiting for him, its pale face staring back at him from the darkness. It had been waiting all along. The figure stood motionless in the middle of the road, its featureless face glowing faintly in the truck's headlights. Jack's pulse quickened, a cold sweat trickling down his spine. He couldn't look away. The longer he stared at the figure, the more it seemed to draw him in, pulling at something deep inside him, a force he couldn't explain. He had to move. There was no time to hesitate. His foot slammed down on the gas pedal again, but this time the truck barely responded. The engine sputtered, as if it were protesting, reluctant to move. Jack's hands gripped the wheel tighter, his knuckles white, as he tried to coax the truck forward. The figure didn't flinch. It didn't move at all. "Move, damn it!" Jack muttered under his breath, panic rising in his chest. He could see the figure clearly now, its shape more defined than before, its body stretching unnaturally tall, like a twisted silhouette against the night. The truck lurched forward with a sputter, but Jack didn't take his eyes off the figure. It was closer now, just at the edge of the headlights. The road ahead seemed to stretch forever, but the figure didn't seem to get any closer. The air around it shimmered, a heat wave of distortion rising from the pavement. Suddenly, there was a sharp screech from the tires as the truck jerked violently to the left, veering off the road. Jack slammed his foot onto the brake, trying to correct the truck's path, but it didn't listen. The wheel was turning by itself, as if some invisible hand was guiding it, pulling it further into the darkness. "Come on! Come on!" Jack yelled, his voice cracking. He fought with the wheel, the truck swerving uncontrollably. The figure in front of him began to grow, filling his view until it consumed the entire windshield. His heart hammered in his chest. It wasn't until the last possible moment that Jack managed to regain control, pulling the truck back onto the road with a violent jolt. The figure was gone. The road ahead was empty again, the desert stretching out endlessly, like a blank canvas. Jack's breath came in ragged gasps as he slowed the truck down, his hands trembling. Was it over? Had he passed the worst of it? He wasn't so sure. The road seemed quieter now, almost too quiet. The hum that had been vibrating through the air had stopped, but there was still something in the air, something that felt off, like the very fabric of reality was fraying at the edges. Jack's eyes darted to the rearview mirror, expecting to see the figure behind him, but there was nothing. The road stretched out in both directions, empty and barren. For a moment, Jack allowed himself to breathe, his mind racing with questions. What was happening? Why was he stuck here? Why couldn't he escape? And then it happened again. In the distance, just beyond the reach of his headlights, a shape appeared. It was faint at first, barely visible, but as the truck drew closer, it became clearer. A car. Jack's heart skipped a beat. It was an old car, A rusted thing that looked as though it had been sitting there for years, abandoned on the side of the road. But what caught Jack's attention wasn't the car itself. It was the figure sitting inside. It was a person. A man, sitting in the driver's seat, staring straight ahead, unmoving. His face was obscured by the shadows inside the car, but Jack could feel the weight of his gaze, as if the man was watching him. He slowed the truck to a crawl as he approached, his eyes locked on the car. Something about it felt wrong. It was as if the man wasn't really there. He wasn't part of this world. As the truck passed the car, Jack glanced over at the figure, his heart racing. And then, for just a brief second, the man's head turned toward him. Jack's breath caught in his throat. The man's face was just as featureless as the figure he had seen earlier. The same pale, smooth skin, like a blank mask, staring back at him with empty eyes. The truck jerked again, its tires screeching against the road as Jack slammed on the gas, speeding away from the car without a second thought. The sound of the engine roared in his ears, drowning out everything else. He couldn't stop. He had to get away. But the road was still endless. The blacktop stretched out before him, the same as before. There was no sign of the car behind him. No sign of the figure. Only the darkness. Jack's eyes darted to the rearview mirror again, half expecting to see the man in the car right behind him. But the mirror was empty. His hands gripped the wheel so tight his fingers ached. The truck's headlights illuminated the empty road ahead, but the feeling of being followed never left. The hum started again, faint at first, but growing louder by the second. Jack's heart sank. He wasn't alone. His eyes scanned the horizon, and then, in the distance, he saw it. Another figure. This time, it was standing in the middle of the road, just like the first one. But this one was different. It was larger, more imposing, its shape shifting with the flickering light. Jack's stomach twisted into knots. He had to stop. He had to get off this road. But where would he go? He was trapped. The road had no end. His foot slammed on the brake as the truck screeched to a halt in front of the figure. It didn't move. It didn't flinch. The figure took a step forward, and then another. Jack's mind raced. He had to do something. He had no choice. The truck's engine roared as Jack threw it into reverse. The wheels spun, kicking up dust as he backed away, the figure still advancing. But the moment Jack shifted into drive again, he realized the road had changed once more. The blacktop was no longer the same. The familiar stretch of pavement had transformed into something unfamiliar, something twisted. The edges of the road were frayed, like the fabric of reality itself was unraveling. The gravel beneath the tires was uneven, jagged, and sharp. The figure was still coming closer, its pale face gleaming in the headlights. Jack couldn't stop it. He couldn't outrun it. There was nowhere to go. And that's when he saw it. In the distance, at the far end of the road, stood a massive, ancient gate. It was covered in vines and rust, towering high above the ground. The gate was wide open, inviting him in. But there was something else. Behind the gate was a massive, looming shape, something dark, something monstrous, standing just beyond the reach of the headlights. It was too far to see clearly, but Jack knew deep down that whatever it wasn't friendly. It was waiting for him. Jack's heart raced as his eyes locked onto the massive, ancient gate ahead. The road before him had morphed into something otherworldly, twisted and broken, but the gate, that was new. It stood like a dark sentinel in the distance, towering high above the desolate road. The iron bars were twisted, some parts of them hanging loose, but it was wide open, as if inviting him to enter. Behind it, just barely visible, stood something dark, a shape that seemed to shift in and out of view, like a nightmare that couldn't quite materialize. The figure was massive, too big to be a man, And yet, Jack could see the faint outlines of its form. Jack's fingers tightened on the steering wheel as he tried to think. Should he keep going? Could he turn back? He glanced at the rearview mirror once more, but the road behind him was empty. No truck, no figures, just endless desert stretching behind him. The hum from earlier had grown louder again, vibrating through the truck like an oppressive force. Jack's ears rang with the sound, the hum seeming to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. He knew this was his moment of choice. If he kept going, he was going toward the gate, toward whatever waited beyond it. But if he turned around, what would he be running from? The thing that had been chasing him, or something even worse. His breath was shallow, his palms slick with sweat. His eyes flicked between the road ahead and the looming gate. The figure was still there, a dark shape just beyond the gate, waiting for him to make his move. There was no going back. Jack slammed the truck into gear and slowly inched forward. The closer he got, the more the air seemed to press in on him, the hum vibrating against his chest like an unspoken promise. The gate grew larger, the dark shape behind it becoming more distinct, but still out of focus. It was waiting. He had to see what it was. As the truck passed under the gate's rusted iron arch, Jack felt a strange sensation ripple through his body, as if the very air had changed. The desert outside the gate disappeared into a thick, suffocating fog that had not been there before. His headlights flickered, casting long shadows across the ground. The figures that had appeared on the road, each shadow that had haunted him, seemed to melt into the fog as though they had never been real. He stopped the truck. The engine sputtered, cutting off with a violent jolt. Jack's hands tightened on the wheel, his pulse racing. The truck had never done that before. There was no warning, just a sudden, violent halt. The air around him seemed to still. The fog thickened, swirling around the truck in unnatural patterns. The only sound was the beat of his heart, deafening in his ears. And then a voice. It came from everywhere and nowhere at once, deep, guttural, and familiar, like something from his own past. It echoed through his head, reverberating in his chest. "Welcome home." The voice was calm, unnervingly so, as if it had been waiting for Jack to arrive. The fog parted slightly, and the figure behind the gate became clearer, though Jack couldn't quite make out its shape. It was large, hunched, its body twisted in a way that made Jack's stomach churn. And then it stepped forward. The figure's face, it wasn't just a blank mask. It was Jack's face. The same eyes, the same hollow expression, but twisted and broken, like a reflection in a shattered mirror. The figure reached out, its long, bony fingers stretching toward him. Jack's breath caught in his throat. This wasn't real. It couldn't be. He was seeing things, hallucinating. The fatigue, the stress, the fear, it was all taking its toll. But the figure stepped closer, its gaze locked on him, and that's when Jack realized something horrifying. The figure wasn't a reflection of him. It was him. His mouth went dry. The world around him seemed to blur, as if reality itself was distorting. The fog swirled faster now, the shadows moving in unnatural rhythms. His vision tunneled, focusing on the thing that had stepped forward, his own face, but not. It was as if his very soul was staring back at him. He shook his head, trying to make sense of it. He needed to get out of there. He needed to. "You've always been here." The voice was softer now, but it held a terrible weight. Jack's eyes darted around, his body frozen in place. The truck was still, but he felt the weight of something, watching him, pulling him closer to the figure. He had no control over his movements anymore. The figure took another step forward, and Jack's chest tightened. His own face was only inches away now. The cold air from the figure's body seeped into him, a chill that made him feel as though he were sinking into an abyss. Jack's lips parted, but no sound came out. His hands were numb, his body trembling. "We've always been one." And then the figure smiled. Jack recoiled in horror as the smile split open impossibly wide, the darkness inside it consuming everything. The air grew thick, like molasses, and time itself seemed to stretch out, elongating the moment into eternity. And then, with a snap, the figure lunged forward. Jack's heart hammered in his chest as his vision swirled into blackness. The truck's headlights went out. The hum stopped. The world went silent. Underscore 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 underscore. When Jack awoke, he wasn't in the truck anymore. He wasn't even on the road. The fog was gone. The gate was gone. Everything was gone, replaced by a wide, empty field. There was no desert, no road, no signs, and no truck. Jack sat up, his mind swirling. His hands grasped the ground beneath him, the cold, rough earth scraping against his palms. The air was still, the silence suffocating. He was somewhere else. But where? His heart raced in his chest as he stood, his legs shaky beneath him. His eyes darted around, looking for anything, any clue to explain where he was. And then, from behind him, came a voice. "You're still here." Jack spun around, his breath catching in his throat. The figure stood just a few feet away, its face still featureless, but now Jack could see the truth. The figure wasn't just an image. It wasn't just a nightmare. It was him. But not in the way he thought. He had never left. This was where it had all started. The blacktop graveyard. The endless road, the gate, the figure. It had always been a part of him. And now he was part of it. The world twisted again, folding in on itself, and Jack was gone. Forever.